And away we go. Now, before I start, surely I'm trying to look at stories that I want to cover in this episode. However, a lot of stories I'm seeing involves, well, unfortunately, a lot of people losing their lives. And whatever the reason that might be, we have to send condolences to the friends and family of those people whose lives were lost. Now, of course, hopefully there's some good news along the way. Let's address the elephant in the room and just get on with it. And that's the end of that. Man charged with murder after dad died following pub assault. On Monday, December 29th, Gothard, 36, of Church Street, Appleby Magna, is due to appear at Leicester Magistrates Court after being charged with murder following an assault outside the Crown Inn. Police were called to Church Street in Appleby Magna around 9:45 dark, with a serious head injury outside the Crown Inn, and accused Nathan Gothard of punching him. On Saturday, December 27th, David Dark, 66, passed away at the Queen's Medical Centre, Nottingham. Mr. Dark's family said his life was tragically cut short, and he's now reunited with his loving, caring parents. Leicestershire Police said inquiries are led by the East Midlands Special Operations Unit, and an appeal for witnesses remain ongoing for anyone with information about the assault. In Appleby Magna, the death has reverberated through the small community. David Dark was a deeply loved father to 3 daughters and a proud grandfather to 3 grandsons. Okay, another story. Elon Musk's next story is somewhat similar. Elon Musk slams Canada's healthcare after Indian origin man dies waiting for treatment. On December 22nd, Prashant Srikumar, a 44-year-old Indian origin Canadian man, passed away at Grade Nuns Community Hospital, Edmonton, after waiting more than 8 hours in the emergency department. Arriving at around 12:15 p.m., Prashant Srikumar reported sharp chest pain, rated 15 out of 10, and had blood pressure of 210. An ECG showed no immediate red flags but delayed treatment. A video filmed by Niharika Shrikumar, wife of Prashant Shrikumar, went viral, and Elon Musk amplified the case on Twitter X on December 26th, saying, "When the government does medical care, it is about as good as the DMV," which sparked debate about public health care. India's Ministry of External Affairs said Canada should take responsibility, noting Shrikumar's Indian origin despite Canadian nationality, and diplomatic channels have been engaged. Longer waits and staffing shortages mean urgent patients wait 6.5 to 8.5 hours and non-urgent over 22 hours, while Ottawa estimates about 49% more GPs are needed, and Fraser Institute specialist waits average 20. Okay. 3 Turkish police, 6 Islamic State militants killed in clash in northwest Turkey. On Monday, Interior Minister Ali Yerlikaya said 3 Turkish police officers and 6 Islamic State militants were killed during a police raid in Elmalik village, Yalova province. After intelligence warned of holiday plots, authorities conducted nationwide raids across multiple provinces last week, detaining 115 suspected Islamic State members planning attacks on Christmas and New Year celebrations. The operation began around 2 a.m. and ended at 8 a.m., with special forces from Bursa province reinforcing the raid while roads were sealed, natural gas and electricity supplies cut. 5 women and 6 children evacuated, and 5 nearby schools suspended. The Yalova Chief Public Prosecutor's Office launched an investigation with 5 state prosecutors assigned and 5 people taken into custody, while 8 wounded police officers and a night guard received treatment. Officials said the militants killed were all Turkish citizens, and authorities arrested more than 19,000 suspected affiliates between 2013 and 2023, as Turkey stepped up counter-terror operations this year. Australia, and then final story relating to many lost lives, hopefully. Australia says Bondi reviewed to check if terror attack could have been averted. Australian Prime Minister Anthony families of victims of the recent Sydney massacre that targeted a Jewish festival released an open letter on Monday calling for more federal action to investigate a rise in anti-Semitism and the security failures behind Australia's worst mass shooting in 3 decades. 2 gunmen are accused of shooting 15 people dead and wounding another 40 in an attack on a Hanukkah festival on Bondi Beach on December 14th. An open letter to Prime Minister Anthony Albanese. 17 families of the dead and wounded called for a federal inquiry known as a Royal Commission to investigate a rise in anti-Semitism in Australia since the Israel-Hamas war began in 2023, and consequent security agency failures. Royal Commissions are the most powerful form of public investigation in Australia, and witnesses can be jailed for deliberately withholding evidence. We need to know why clear warning signs were ignored, how anti-Semitic hatred and Islamic extremism were allowed to dangerously grow unchecked, and what changes must be made to protect all Australians going forward, the letter said. But Albanese continued to resist calls from the families, Jewish leaders and opposition lawmakers to establish such a royal commission, saying it would take years to provide answers. Now, a lot of stories I have covered thus far in this episode. Just before I started recording, those were the few stories that have popped up more frequently than not. And of course, the reasons why people have lost their lives will certainly vary regarding the ethnicity of a man in Canada, despite Canadian nationality, and the Canadian healthcare. That's one of the issues. Bondi Beach shooting, absolutely awful. And of course, lives were lost in Turkey. And of course, a man lost. And of course, another life was lost somewhere around Leicestershire. And whatever information you make of this, I will say one thing and one thing only. Rest in peace to all the lives that were lost, whether it be in England, Australia, Turkey, and even Canada. I do send my condolences to the friends and family of those people whose lives were lost for reasons that varies depending on the stories which I have covered thus far. It may be naive to ask for hope and peace in this world, even when such desires like that are absolutely impossible at this time to be achieved. From my view, I don't think we're questioning things enough. We are not questioning how could a country's healthcare not be up to code or standards. Why is it that people's lives have been lost from mass shootings that could have easily been prevented if there was further measures to prevent such events from even happening in the first place. Like, there was supposed to be some kind of shooting happening in Los Angeles, but for some reason, and thankfully, the federal level authorities have put a stop to that. But it did come at the cost of having many cities across Europe, America, and all over the world to have their local Christmas markets to close early in fears that lives were to be lost if these Christmas markets were to continue to be opened. Even going forward, I don't think people are questioning what goes on in this world. There are so many things in this world that are testing our patience and even our sanity. However and whatever happens, we have to stay strong and never let the enemy win. Never stoop to the level of our enemies, because that is exactly what they want. It's very unfortunate. Also, there's also a lot. And I just realized that there are also now more stories about other people. Like, for instance, there's a car crash in Nigeria involving Anthony Joshua and two of his closest friends. And unfortunately, two of Anthony Joshua's close friends have passed away since being in that fatal car accident. And I will say, rest in peace. Actually, before I say rest in peace, I need to know the names. I know that they've said the names, I just need to see what. Okay, I couldn't find the names of the close friends of Anthony Joshua. But nonetheless, rest in peace to them. I send my condolences to the friends and family of those two lads, who have been very close to Anthony Joshua for many years. They were even there for all of Anthony Joshua's career, up until the fight between him and Jake Paul, which just shows the history that goes behind the people involved in Anthony Joshua's boxing career. And given how much history these two lads have had with Anthony, surely it's going to be a lot for Anthony Joshua's process. It's very, very unfortunate. Okay, and I will promise you right now, two more stories, and that is it. I won't be covering any more reports on people being unalived for the rest of this episode. One is at least 13 people having lost their lives after train derails in Mexico, and then, oh my gosh, another shooting along the coastline in Ecuador. 6 people have lost their lives, including a 2-year-old girl. I'll try to be brief with this. On December 28th, multiple gunmen killed 6 people, including an approximately 2-year-old toddler, on a beachside boardwalk in Puerto Lopez, Manabi province. Police have initial reports pointed to an internal dispute between criminal groups amid gang rivalries tied to drug trafficking, roots linked to Mexican and Colombian cartels. Armed men in a van and on 2 motorcycles opened fire with automatic weapons on the boardwalk around 9 a.m., wounding 3 others before fleeing. No arrests announced, police said. It was the 3rd deadly attack in the city this weekend, bringing a week death toll of 9 and threatening tourism at the whale-watching hub Puerto Lopez. The Organized Crime Observatory reports Ecuador is on track for 52 homicides per 100,000 residents, while President Daniel Noboa's hardline policies have done little against cartel-linked gang activity. And then, one more story before I give my take on all of this. On Sunday, the interoceanic train derailed in Asunción, Telpec, Oaxaca going off the rails while rounding a curve near Nizanda and partially tilting over a cliff. The interoceanic train, inaugurated in 2023 as part of the Interoceanic Corridor project, links Salina Cruz and Coatzacoalcos course and is operated by Mexico's Navy. At least 13 people were killed and 98 injured, including 36 needing hospital care, while images showed one carriage of it on its side and another separated from the tracks. Mexico's Attorney General's office opened an investigation. President Claudia Sheinbaum directed the Secretary of the Navy and senior officials to assist families, while the Ministry of Interior coordinates the response, and naval and rescue personnel face difficult site access. The derailment touches a high-profile interoceanic corridor project intended to boost trade and development, with the Salina Cruz Coatzacoalcos route covering about 180 miles. And for this episode, that is all of the stories where lives have been lost. End of. Just end of. And I know I've already said this, but however, I will say this again, now knowing that more people's lives have been lost in Mexico and in Ecuador. Rest in peace to the lives lost in Ecuador and Mexico. And I also send condolences to the friends and family of those people whose lives were lost in Ecuador and in Mexico. Now, usually I would just go back and forth with these stories with any other stories normally in these episodes with other stories that aren't related to people losing their lives. However, just before I started recording, I was bombarded with such stories like this. And I was like, oh my gosh. This week, or today as of this recording, is not a good day or a good week for anyone who happens to know these people who are no longer alive anymore and have lost their lives because of a train derailment, mass shootings, whether it be organized by a terrorist group or extremists. A life was lost with links to healthcare in the country, and I'm I'm speechless. It is very sad. Well, of course it's sad. It's devastating. And whilst there is a lot more lives that have been lost in the Gaza Strip, in Ukraine, Sudan, Ethiopia, Nigeria, and possibly Myanmar, this is what our world has come to. Now the thing is, not everyone are going to know about these stories. The reason why you don't hear often about these stories on mainstream news is because whilst it gets attention and people will be sending prayers to the friends and family of those people whose lives were lost, there are other things going on, like diplomatic missions and how much an artifact is worth to be transferred to another museum, trade agreements amongst nations. How much money will a war-torn country is going to be receiving to help with war efforts? Those are the stories we're hearing so much about. We never talk about. And whilst no one wants to hear negative headlines like this, I understand. Yet stories like that is going to come about. And even when there are experts, officials, and whoever involved with saving friends and families of those who have been affected by devastations and disastrous catastrophes, there's always going to be elements and factors that are beyond our control, and then lives are still going to be lost anyway. But what we can do is to reduce that amount of the lives being lost. Not just each year, but also each month and each week. No one should ever go through such devastations at any point of our lives. You just never know when such events are going to happen to you, or anyone that you know, when you least expect them to happen. So, that is all I have to say on just the stories I've already covered so far in this episode. I know there's a lot to take in. However, it is important that we understand that not a lot of news outlets are often going to cover such stories. Or at least they're not going to make such important headlines to everyone. However, there will be someone saying something, but it's not enough. It's not enough to talk about this. It's not enough to say, "Oh, that is so unfortunate. I send prayers and condolences to you." What should these people do to ensure that something like this doesn't happen again next time? And again, even when situations and events like this has happened before, they're still happening again. Outrageous. Absolutely outrageous. Flock camera captured kids on a playground. A security failure exposed them online. At least 60 AI-powered surveillance cameras from Flock Safety were left exposed online. The exposure allowed anyone with a link to the cameras to watch live feeds and access archived videos. The technologist who discovered the exposure showed how people filmed by the cameras could easily be identified. The exposure of the camera's live feeds were first reported by the technologist and YouTuber Ben Jordan in a video released on Monday. He showed how a simple search engine query uncovered the camera's administrative panels. Jordan, who published his findings alongside 404 Media, revealed how Flock not only exposed real-time video feeds from across the country, but also 30 days worth of archived videos collected by the company's Condor PTZ cameras. None of the data or video footage was encrypted, Jordan said. There was no username or password required. These were all completely public-facing for the world to see, and some of them still are. The access could have been allowed Jordan to perform numerous administrative tasks, such as changing camera settings, running diagnostics, viewing log files, and deleting videos. Goodness me. So they're just cameras. Anyone can look at them and just say, "Oh, there's children playing in the playground. Yeah, that's not suspiciously creepy at all." But it is. It certainly is. And thank goodness that no one else has ever thought of this. Only one person, and it's the person who has snitched to whatever authorities that have now made the story well known. How is it possible to have gotten access to that footage to begin with? What kind of link? Where do you even go to get a link that allows you to get access to the cameras, which films wherever public spaces are about? And if people find that out, now although some people would argue that this could be a good thing that allows the public to access cameras in public spaces, so there's a higher chance of other acts or other people to take accountability for their actions in the event that the majority of the public catches these people in the act using the publicly accessed footage, surveillance cameras. There is also a major downside to allowing the public to have access to the cameras, especially if they have administrative control. They can change the video settings, they could delete the footage of such people doing whatever, and worse, and and this may be a stretch, but given how technology is becoming so advanced, it might as well be possible. Someone could edit the surveillance footage to make the situation or context of whatever was happening to be made out as something else. Or to the point that the context is not just different, but the context goes from whatever but to absolutely horrifying. Or even editing the footage from the surveillance cameras to antagonize someone. Those are my thoughts. I've always wondered if people could ever access CCTV cameras in public spaces. And now reading that story, I can see where this will go. It's not a good look. Even if there's positives like allowing the public to observe public spaces and what happens, and even reporting accidents or serious incidences in public spaces whilst without actually being in that space in real. There's still a concern about using such footage out of context and trying to antagonize people when such people weren't doing anything bad to begin with. Now, I'm not defending people who do criminal acts. However, there are people that aren't doing anything wrong, but there are people that would use such footage to antagonize someone to then make them to get them arrested and have to pay some kind of money for bail or just to keep something quiet. That's a completely different can of beans to open. Nonetheless, for the most part, it is probably best that the public don't have access to CCTV camera footage, whilst it would be interesting to see how members of the public could use such access to look at particular moments in any public space in real time, especially if there are any serious moments that have happened. On the other hand, if anyone in members of the public, somehow, for some reason, one of them got administrative access, they could mess with the video footage or even delete minutes or hours of surveillance footage in hopes that people don't find out what happened in that particular time, at that particular space. And such people who do that is if they're guilty of something and they want to cover their tracks. But again, that's just me. It is quite frightening thinking about this. Electricity prices set for another jump in 2026. Electricity prices are expected to keep rising to start 2026. The US Energy Information Administration expects bills to rise by more than 4% after jumping by nearly 5% this past year. Higher natural gas costs and inclement weather are among the reasons for the increase, while the effect of data centers remain up for debate. Electricity costs are higher than inflation, most recently reported at a 2.7% annual rise in November, according to the latest Consumer Price Index report. In the same report, the Energy Index, including a variety of types, rose at an annual rate of 4.2%, while electricity alone rose by 6.9%. Oh boy. And if you think inflation couldn't get any worse, it sure has. And even if there isn't much worse a difference in inflation rises, the costs are still going up regardless. And even though this is in the US, who's to say that this is not happening anywhere else? It's likely happening everywhere else. The only difference is how do countries handle their inflation and their rise in electricity costs? And what can we learn from those countries when it comes to the cost of electricity and other energy sources? I'm all for answers and solutions. But until then, there is so much that can be done. The question is, what's it going to take? Will it be enough? Most likely not, but it is worth a shot though. FBI expands Minnesota daycare fraud probe after viral video. Oh my gosh, I've heard so much about this. On Sunday, FBI Director Kash Patel said the FBI is investigating fraud schemes in Minnesota and has surged resources to dismantle the Feeding Hours future scheme, which involved over 50. Leaning on local investigation, a YouTuber claimed investigations uncovered $110 million in fraud at Minnesota childcare providers, renewing scrutiny in recent weeks. The prosecutions have resulted in 78 indictments and 57 convictions, and some defendants received sentences including a 10-year term and nearly $48 million restitution, while prosecutors charged a juror bribery plot involving $120,000 in cash. Patel and prosecutors warn the cases may be just the beginning, noting the prosecuted cases are the tip of the iceberg, while Assistant U.S. Attorney Joe Thompson said fraud could number in the billions and many are referred to immigrate, and reporting shows most charged in recent cases are of Somali descent, a fact cited nationally, and Fox 9 found similar fraud schemes nationwide, while President Donald Trump urged information enforcement in the Twin Cities. Now, firstly, make of that information as you will, even if whoever's responsible for the scheme, or I don't know what you call it, regarding childcare in Minnesota, being of a particular people group or ethnic descent, it is impressive. I'm not saying it's a good thing. However, it is impressive how a group of people have managed to set up daycare centers in hopes to get millions of dollars in federal or at least statewide support, in hopes that by the views of the state and or federal government to provide accessible childcare in Minnesota. But what they didn't know is that most of these daycare centers, which have now been revealed by this investigation, turns out aren't holding that many children. In fact, most of them are not taking care of any children. Most of them are just set up just to take federal money, taking support money, which should have gone towards childcare support. And this is exactly why. And this is one of the reasons, in my opinion, why you shouldn't always trust the government for anything and everything. Not that they're going to help you or anything, but if they do, but if the government does help you in some way, most likely than not, support from the government could go towards groups of people that who are the last people would ever need such support. That's just me. I mean, if it's necessary for you to get that support, then fair enough. However, there has to be good reason for you to get that support. And like we've seen in this story about daycare centers in Minnesota, that is shocking. How could any of this went under people's noses? And why now are people finding that out? Devastating. Imagine that the money that went towards daycare centers in Minnesota could have been used for otherwise. Imagine all the money that went towards daycare centers in Minnesota. What could have they been used for instead? The potential, the opportunity costs in the funds going towards such daycare centers in Minnesota. And now people finding out that there hasn't been much active support or working within these daycare centers. They're just set up just to get funding from the government. I will say, fair play to them. It's not good that there are people doing this. However, to go on for this long until now, pretty sneaky. They had a good run, but now it's over. They're going to have to get support money from elsewhere or from other stuff, if that support even exists. I guess that's it then for. I think no, I don't think it's over for daycares in Minnesota. It's just given the scale of people who even set up these daycare centers just to get money from the government. I think people that actually do run daycare centers that are actually taking care of children, they're going to be worried that if, for some reason, hypothetically, if the federal authorities were to come into that daycare center, actually no, that there's no way. No, there's no way. I think that's at this point. I think the appropriate authorities are actually going to do more frequent checks into daycare centers to see if there are actually children being taken care of by adults, or if there are any children at all. If not, then yeah, I don't see why that such daycare center is to continue running. Blue Jays named the Canadian Press Team of the Year after the playoff run. A feeling of uncertainty hung in the air at training camp last February, when the Toronto Blue Jays began preparations for the 2025 campaign. The team was coming off a last-place finish. Its homegrown face of the franchise remained unsigned beyond the season, and the possibility of playoff contention seemed iffy at best. What a difference a year makes! The Blue Jays completed a worst-to-first turnaround and rode the momentum into a memorable postseason that saw them go all the way to Game 7 of the World Series. On Sunday, the Blue Jays were named the winner of the Canadian Press Team of the Year award in balloting by editors, writers, and broadcasters from across the country. The team had 29 out of 53 votes, 55%, to finish well ahead of the women's curling team, skipped by Rachel Homan 10. One of the things that made the run so special this year was seeing how it impacted and ignited and lifted the entire country. Blue Jays president Mark Shapiro said, "And I think every single player and every person in this organization felt that and felt a great sense of pride about that." The Canadian women's rugby team finished third with 5 votes. The Canadian men's 4x100-meter relay team that won Olympic gold at the Paris Games was named CP Team of the Year in 2024. The Blue Jays fan base was invigorated last April when the team signed star first baseman Vladimir Guerrero Jr. to a team record 14-year, $500 million contract extension. It was a big statement from Canada's lone big league team, which endured a mediocre start before turning the corner in late June. Another bold move came at the trade deadline in late July, when general manager Ross Atkins acquired star pitcher Shane Bieber, who had a meaningful role down the stretch in the playoffs. Well done, Blue Jays. Good for them. Now, of course, I'll be honest, I don't pay attention to baseball. Nonetheless, it was a good run for the Blue Jays, especially the season before. They did pretty badly, and now they're on top of the world. And they have now won Canadian Press Team of the Year for 2025. That's quite impressive. It's not often you get achievements like that for any team. And if they do, well, I think it's someone else's turn to get a moment in the spotlight for the achievements they have achieved so far for the year. And or the season. Let's see if this continues into the new year. You know, one of those times when a team does very good one year, then the next year they're like, it's kind of mid. Not that they're bad, however, that one year they do very well, and that's it. Or could it be that they could be on the rise? They could go on a run to win back-to-back titles across multiple seasons. Who knows? We'll just have to wait and see. As it looks, it seems pretty exciting. And as for other teams in Canada, shortly they will go on to do great things in the years to come. And that is it for the episode.